Welcome to another edition of Yorkton Stories. Twice a month, we take a look at Yorkton's past and present in conversations with people who were involved in the topic we were looking at, or those who are very familiar with it. The collective minds of Yorkton people hold vast amounts of facts and interesting stories, which we try to tap into and record for posterity. My name is Dick DeReich. I was a co-founder, co-owner, and editor of Yorkton This Week newspaper, and have owned and operated businesses in Yorkton over the past almost 50 years. This podcast is largely a labor of love, but we are grateful for the support of Harvest Meats and Grain Millers Canada, both here in Yorkton, and others who help out or listen to our stories. Our podcasts are heard on our website, yorktonstories.ca, where you will also find photos, links, and other information associated with each podcast when available. In many cases, you can not only hear the stories, you can also see and read information about them on our website. We are also found on all major podcast directories, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, TuneIn and Alexa, and iHeartRadio. Search for Yorkton Stories, and you will find us. It's been just over 16 years since Clay Serby left provincial politics and government in November of 2007 in order to devote his time to dealing with health issues, cancer, for which he had been under treatment for the previous 3 years. He was first elected as the New Democrat member for Yorkton in 1991. He wrote the backbenches for several years and was not especially a favorite of then Premier Roy Romanow. But over the span of 10 years, the two became close friends, and Clay subsequently served in cabinet in some very high-profile portfolios: health, education, highways, municipal affairs, and agriculture. It was under Romanow's successor, Lorne Calvert, that Clay reached the highest level of any Yorkton MLA deputy premier. He also continued in the agriculture portfolio and dealt with economic development and rural development specifically. I first got to know Clay when we both served on Yorkton City Council in 1987 and 88. He was, at the time, the executive director of SIGN, the Society for the Involvement of Good Neighbors, having succeeded the original head of that organization, Elton Davidge, in 1980. He had been a social worker, and I may have become familiar to him earlier, he told me a few years back. The Serbys lived down the block from us in the mid-1970s, and one day he saw me spanking my son in the front yard. Parents did that back then, but social workers apparently did not approve. He thought about reporting me. He didn't, or our relationship on city council and since might have turned out quite differently. Following his retirement from politics and his reprieve from cancer, we did some work together privately on the economic development front and got to know each other much better as we traveled together. I suggested to him several times that we should write a book about his experiences in politics, but that never went beyond talk. In October of 2022, Clay and Trish moved to Oliver, British Columbia. And when I was in the area last November, I suggested to him that we're both getting a little too old to start a book project. So why don't we have a long conversation and record it for a podcast? And here it is. You were on city council. You had an important, significant job in Yorkton. Why the move into provincial politics?
I was involved with a couple of buddies. One of them was Pat Koski, who had a long relationship with the political system, given that his uncle was involved and his family, his dad was involved as well. So after the election in Yorkton, where we should have won the seat and we didn't win the seat, we decided that we would never let that happen again. And so Pat and I decided that we were going to get the association going again. Having been in municipal politics, I had a fairly good idea of what sort of transpires in the political system, never of any large degree on the provincial side, but had, enough association with it that said, this would be something we would enjoy doing. And so Pat and I went on to have that conversation and decide which one of us was going to run and who was going to be the manager. And he thought that I could speak a lot better than him, okay, and that I knew a lot more people than he did. So he said, you have to be the profile guy, and I'll work behind the scenes, and we'll build an organization. And that's what we did. That's kind of how we got started locally. I had a call one day from a fellow by the name of Glenn Hagel, who said, I'd like to come and visit with you. And we had a long, long conversation, like probably the better part of an evening and into the night. He gave me a fairly good understanding and appreciation of what it would be like to do this and the kind of work it would take and the sacrifices that you have to make to do that. He gave me a couple of weeks to think about it and then call him back. And so Pat and Glenn and I then got together and then away we went. We started organizing an executive in Yorkton and building what we did.
But running a provincial election campaign is quite different than trying to get elected to city council.
The work is far greater on the provincial side, for sure, and probably more so even on the federal side than it was with municipal council. But I had run for municipal council early, and I didn't win. There was 26 of us that ran, and I finished 7th.
It's no good when there's only 6 aldermen at the time elected.
That's right? Exactly right. So I finished 7th. When I decided to run a second time for city council, I had a fellow by the name of Wayne Howland who had the honey business. And he had an idea for the provincial campaign. He said, what we're going to do is, along with the brochures, we're going to take some of these little tiny containers, put honey in them. They're like the little butter containers that you find in a restaurant. And over the top of it, we're going to put clay, a honey of a man. Okay? So he put together hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those little containers. And we went out and when we canvassed the streets, and we would leave them with this little honey container. And of course, it was very successful. The work was difficult. It was long, and some days I found somewhat tedious because you were doing the same thing over and over every day. But you met everybody. And so we ended up knocking on every door that there was in the city of Yorkton. A friend of mine from the opposition, after we were in government, his name was Bill Boyd. He said to me one day when I was campaigning, after being in government for a period of time in the Kindersley area, our numbers weren't looking that good. And Kindersley has always been a long-time Conservative seat. And he said to me, what are you looking for? And I said, I'm looking for a candidate. And he said to me, you see that black dog over there? He said, if you put a sign around that black dog and say he's Conservative, he's going to beat your guy. Okay. It was a long, long process, but governments, they don't normally get elected. They get defeated. In 91, the Conservative government under Grant Devine had all kinds of issues. Politics is about timing too. So it was the right time for anybody who wasn't Conservative to be a New Democrat and get elected.
The new NDP government in 1991 inherited some major problems from the previous Progressive Conservative government of Grant Devine, including a $14 billion deficit. And that made for some tough decisions on the part of Mr. Romanow and the new government.
In the first term that I was there, the entire exercise in the first term was about how do we bring ourselves to a balanced budget within, a period of 8 years. And the first 4 years were going to be very difficult times for us. I ran because you want to do things. You want to grow your economy. You want to make a difference in your constituency. We did work in our constituency, all right, but it was stuff that wasn't very popular. I mean, when you're cutting back on healthcare services, you're freezing people's salaries for 8 years at a time, and you're announcing that right after you get elected. You're not making any inroads into the infrastructures and with municipalities or, in larger communities. So it was a bit of a shock, to be honest with you, for those of us who were not really close to the inner circle. Because when you got 55 members and you have a small cabinet of about, I think Roy had 11 to start with, there was a lot of the members that were there for a long period of time in opposition that worked very hard to get us to the spot that we were in. They weren't even anywhere near making a decision. And so here was someone like me who was brand new. And then we had to go back to our constituencies and talk to people about how difficult this was going to be. It helped, for sure, that doing the Divine era, they did some things that, caused a great deal of hardship for individuals and within their own party. I mean, some people took their lives, and some people went to jail. And so the public could understand the rationale for why we needed to do this stuff, but how painful that was going to be. One didn't have a full appreciation of it. And so it was about balancing the budget, as you say. It was number one priority, getting the expenditures under control, and then trying to grow the economy, or at least sustain the economy before you start to try to grow it again. So it was a difficult process.
As we mentioned earlier, Clay and Roy Romanow didn't especially hit it off all that well at the start of that 1991 term.
I wasn't his favorite player, that's for sure, to start with. I thought I came with a fairly large toolbox with lots of tools in it. I'd already served on municipal councils, had a really good command of what was happening in our region, our area. I was a farmer, so I knew what was happening in the agricultural community. I worked with governments, so understood what governments were all about. In a community organization like Signs, so I had a good appreciation of what it was like to work in a nonprofits environment. When he went to select his cabinet, and I'm not in it, it was a bit of an annoyance. And so I would let him know from time to time about how unhappy I was about some of the things that were happening. For me personally, he did the right thing. He did the right thing by not including me at that particular time. And we had lots of headbutts about it. And even in some of the caucus meetings, I was quite verbose about some things. As much as Roy didn't like conflict within his own party or within his own caucus or government, he liked to see people come with fresh ideas. And so he would entertain those kinds of things. And it often looked like he was pacifying you. And when you start to feel like somebody's just pacifying you, you become more intense. And so I did. As a result of it, we made our way through that. And after the first term, then I was in government, or I was in cabinet. But it was an interesting period, I got to say. Lucky that both of our horns were not as long as they could have been, because we might have injured ourselves.
But that turned around in the next 6 or 7 years.
When he decided to resign, he called me into his office and said, I'm making some really difficult decisions. And by then he'd given me some very difficult assignments as well, put me into situations where, I didn't know that I was, how we're going to get through them, actually. And so he had tremendous confidence in some of the stuff that he thought I could do, that I was successful in doing, and he was a real mentor during that period of time. And we become very good friends, to be honest with you, very, very good friends, and kidded about, the early years of being in politics, which I think I appreciate most about the man is that he recognized what my capacities were, that he shouldn't exercise them right away because he didn't need to. And I needed time. You need time to grow in these things. It's like anything else. Even though your toolbox feels pretty full, it really is quite empty when you come to managing a province.
When Roy Romanow retired in 2001, did you give any thought to running for the leadership of the party? Because the leader of the party at that time would have automatically become the Premier of Saskatchewan. Any thoughts on your part as far as throwing your name into the mix?
Yes, there was a small group of us that at that time, and I'd already had a number of portfolios, and they said that I couldn't. I was so bad at my job I couldn't hold one, so they kept moving me around. But which was a really good exercise because I got to know the operations of all of government really well. When Roy decided that he wasn't going to run again, and he said to me that I should give consideration to it, I was also having the same conversations with Lorne Calvert, because Lorne and I were very close. And a couple of other people, Pat Atkinson was involved in some of our conversation. It came down to which one of us should do it. Should it be Lorne or should it be I? And my opinion is that Lorne had served longer to start with. Lorne is a good political thinker. He had less responsibility at home than I did. I still had a fair bit of responsibilities at home. And I think he's more articulate. He can make fun of himself. And also, he's comfortable with people, and people are comfortable with him. And we were needing that kind of an individual, was my view. Collectively, we just said, you need to be the guy, not me. You need to be the guy.
The difference between Roy Romanow and Lorne Calvert, who succeeded him, is pretty stark. I mean, it's almost like day and night as far as their style and their personalities.
Very different personalities, for sure, Roy and Lorne. Lorne he's more comfortable at the kitchen table, if I can put it that way, than Roy would ever be. Lorne's the kind of guy that you could meet on the street. You won't forget the guy after you have a conversation with him. He's very, very passionate, as Roy was, but more compassionate, in my view, than to some degree Roy was. But their styles of politics were not a lot different, although Lorne would bring himself to make a decision far quicker than Roy would. Roy would agonize for long periods of time about how something should be achieved or attempted to be accomplished. It was easier to move a congregation, I think, than it was to move a political party, and so Roy, he was more concerned about the electorate than Lorne was. If we have good policy, normally that dictates into good government and good government policy. Roy was far more interested in, I think, or had a greater interest in making sure that you could govern. And the only way that you can govern is that you have to get elected. He had a better pulse, I think, on that than what Lorne did, although Lorne's compassion for people was far greater.
I suggested to Clay that those of us who were watching politics at the time thought that the NDP government under Romanow and Calvert could just as easily have been a left-wing liberal government. They weren't the same type of dyed-in-the-wool CCF NDPers that we knew from the days of Alex Kuziak in Yorkton and Fred Nybrandt and Adolphe Matsala up in Carnora, Blakeney, certainly Woodrow Lloyd. They were probably more pragmatic and further to the right in the spectrum that the old CCF would have occupied.
We probably could be identified, a number of us could have been identified as being liberal. We were far more centrist than one would have ever imagined. And we did stuff that were centrist. I mean, we changed the royalty structure, on the resources in favor of the resources. And we got a real beating, I remember being at a convention and I didn't think we'd come out of there alive. It was our folks, on the ground believe that, we should be extracting more from the resource community than what we were already getting as opposed to giving them more, and so it was the economics of it. But you're right. I think that a large majority of those of us who served, and for sure Roy could have been a liberal without any doubt. I'm not sure about Janice. Okay, I'm not sure where Janice's politics really were, and I say this, and I've said this to her too. openly. I'm not sure that she was ever a New Democrat, but she served as a New Democrat, and she served us well during the time that she did. But she also served other political parties in Saskatchewan after us to the same degree or more. Had the Liberals and the Conservatives not formed the coalition in Saskatchewan, had they not done that, not after our first term, not even quite our first term, Linda Haberstock was the leader of the Liberal Party in Saskatchewan. And she was just gaining some very, very significant momentum when there was a decision that was made by those that were sitting as Liberals at that time, along with those that were sitting as Conservatives, particularly Bill Boyd, of whom you can credit the Saskatchewan Party for. I mean, there's been lots written about this. There has been a lot said about this, but the party that we have government in now, which is the Saskatchewan Party, this is Bill Boyd's construction. He organized it, he developed it, he constructed it. And some people, I might say, and I say this kindly to those that were Liberals, they sold their soul, but they became government for sure and have governed ever since. But Linda was at the point of having captured sufficient support in the province of Saskatchewan. We wouldn't have won had they not killed Linda. Because when they did that, they needed to reorganize themselves within their own party, and then they had a whole bunch of issues with leadership. They had Elwyn Hermanson, and so they struggled through that period of time, and it helped us for sure.
Clay served as deputy premier under Lorne Calvert from 2001 to 2007, the first representative from Yorkton to assume that position. I asked him what that meant, what the difference was between being deputy premier and being, for instance, a minister of a pretty major department of government.
One of the things it does mean is when the premier is absent, that you will then do what's on his schedule for him or her, and you will chair the cabinet meetings, if they're away for any period of time or happen to be away at that time. I had the privilege of traveling with Premier Calvert to Western Provincial Premiers Conferences. So I went to all of those with him, and I think there were 4 of them that I went to. So you would be like a second voice to the Premier when we're discussing issues at the Western Premiers meetings. The other thing that would happen, of course, is that you'll always have people who are members of either the caucus or the cabinet that are unhappy with something or another. And so it then becomes the deputy premier's job to try and go and rectify or pacify that situation so that it doesn't come to the premier. Because if it's coming to the premier, then he's always going to be dealing with those kinds of things. So there'll be all sorts of issues. 2 cabinet ministers not getting along, an issue that doesn't work, somebody threatening to do something out there as a private member. You would do that job.
You're a bit of the policeman of the party?
That's it. Yeah, for the premier. The other is that as you prepare for an election, it becomes the responsibility of the deputy premier to try and find and help the party find candidates. So you would travel about the province when you think you had, people who were interested. So I'd be traveling to various different parts of the province to meet with people, to encourage them to think about it. You have a very strong liaison then with the party and the next election, in preparing for getting your members in place. And then, of course, if there is an issue that the premier is not comfortable with, that somebody is advocating, one of the ministers are advocating, then it would be the deputy premier's responsibility to go in and try to better understand it, meet with the deputy and the minister, and then report back some of your findings. And Lorne was way better at that than I think Roy was. But I wasn't Roy's deputy. He had Dwayne Lingenfelter. And in that position, the Premier needs to have somebody who always has his back.
I thought there must be some surprises in how things operate, and we talked about that.
Having come from municipal politics, you function pretty much as an individual, as you brought your own ideas and your thinking to the table. You got the support of those that you needed in order to pass something. In a provincial system and in the federal system is the same, is that it's not necessarily that the majority will run the day. You can come out of a cabinet meeting and you think you have scored a victory and that you have all of your ducks in line, and only to find that when we're going into the legislature on an issue, that when the third line whip kicks in, and there isn't such a thing in municipal politics, but when the third line whip kicks in, it's coming from the top, from the very top. And when it comes from the top, it doesn't matter what your position was or is. That's how you're voting. So that surprised me a great deal, because in a democracy, majority rules. Not the case. I was keen when I was had the portfolio of municipal government to do some work around the consolidations of municipalities, both urban and rural, and had all of my ducks in line, all of them, except for maybe one or two, which really do count. Okay, so at the end of the day, what happened, of course, is that we were well out ahead of everybody else on this as a ministry, and for sure well ahead of the Premier. And he did stop me one day on the way to cabinet, and he said to me, and we had, as I say, a very good friendship by then. And he'd call me boy. He'd say, "Boy, you're a long way out on this, a long way out. You might need to reel it in a bit." I said, "Nah, it's going really well, Roy. It's going really well." He said, "Okay." And after a week or so of a great deal of political pressure, that was making its way now directly to the Premier. And that's not a good thing when it goes directly to the Premier. It's not so bad when it's with the ministry. And he called the municipal leaders together and said, with me in the room, saying, "We aren't going to be doing this." So this great scheme or this great idea that we had, and tremendous amount of work that we did on it, there's tons and tons of work on it, and probably some of the papers still exist today, never happened. And we drew a lot of our processes from Alberta because they were in a county system. Manitoba has a very, very nice blended system. And even in British Columbia here, they have, they don't have the municipal structures anymore. They have the regional ones. Yes, that it was a lesson that I learned, that I was surprised to learn, because I was just of the view that our majorities are going to rule. I mean,
in offices of the Premier and the higher ups, there are appointed officials who are unelected, but who appear to have a lot of influence over what the government does. I asked Clay, how big is that influence? How much influence do they really have?
It's huge. Yeah. It's absolutely huge, and which is part of the other piece that I didn't understand fully either, and that is that all of the deputies are appointed by the Premier on the recommendation of his deputy, usually, and they all report directly to his deputy and to him. And so when they've decided to do something, I would not be the first person to hear about it. The deputy of my ministry would be the first person to hear about it. And nor do I know what my deputy would have said in that meeting, because his master is really the Premier. As a minister, I'm there at the will of the Premier as well, except that my deputy will have a tremendous amount more information than I would have. And many of his people who work within his own department, they would have a great deal of influence on it as well.
But the potential is there then for ministers to almost get blindsided.
Well, it does happen. It also depends on the minister, because like in any other area that people do work in, you can put in as much as you want in some cases. And I've seen in our own administration, and I see in, Premier Mo's administration today, people who don't do anything or don't make any decisions on their own at all. It's all funneled up to the deputy, and the deputy would make those kinds of recommendations. And so you really only become a manager, and a spokesperson. You carry the message, which is not something that I was good at. I wanted to know what my ministries were doing. I wanted to know what we could do differently to enhance the quality of what we're doing. And it's that personality and ability for me to practice that stood me in really good stead, particularly when I became deputy premier, because I could go around to each of the ministries and I had full access to them, which was really good. And many of them were my deputies. So it was a comfortable spot.
You were never in finance.
No. And never in environment. And I don't regret that. I had health for a period of time. I quite enjoyed health only because I knew lots of people in the system and understood the importance of the portfolio. And it eats the biggest part of your budget. So, you are in where the action is when you have the health ministry. But I really did enjoy agriculture. Partly because, my roots have been at rural, and we had some significant things that we needed to change and with the crop insurance system. And then we had the BSE issue, which was really a difficult one for farmers and ranchers. And so those two I enjoyed a great deal. And I had education for a period of time, but all of them had their own sort of interesting periods, as municipal government did, and had highways for a period of time, and we were able to do a couple of things. But I'm really very much a change agent. I'd like to see things enhanced, improved, and it's just been who I am. And so we were fortunate in changing a lot of things.
There's a lot more to politics and government, of course, than just what happens in Regina, because MLAs also have a local office. They also need to solve local issues, speak with people, hear their complaints, hear their problems, and do the work at the very local level.
You have a long day, for sure. And I had the good fortune of having two very good constituency office people, like Kathy Scott and Shirley Williams. They were exceptional people. And they would keep me informed about everything that's happening in the riding all the time. I would make a point of being home at least one day a week, sometimes two. If there was any kind of an event that had, significance to people, big or small, just try to be there. And I had an open phone line. So I'd say to people, you need something, call me or call the office, and they'll call me and I'll get back to you. And I could function most times with 5 or 6 hours of sleep. I didn't need any more than that. Yeah, there are even times where I still do it today, but they're for one day at a time.
Governing has its highs and lows. We talked about the ones that most stick in Clay's mind years later.
What I really felt good about that's happened with my career really happened in two spots. One was in the riding itself, because in the riding, at the level that I was able to do things, we brought to our city, and I had great support in our city from lots of people, including those who not necessarily were party members, but were friends. We bring dialysis to Yorkton, which is one of the few rural areas that had it first. We get a CT scanner in Yorkton, when I had health. We build a nursing home. We add on to it. When other people aren't getting money, we're getting $16 million to do that. We change the structure of SGI and, bring that there. The two big canola plants when we were in agriculture, these are things that I was firsthand with the city. You don't accomplish those things on your own. You do it with other leaders. And then, of course, the other is at the national level. On many of the occasions that I was a minister of a department, we were also the Canadian chairs for the provinces. So I got to chair, I think, 3 different portfolios that were national portfolios, like health, for example. In health, when I was there and we were chairing it, we were having a huge problem with the Red Cross, and the Canadian Blood Agency was in the midst of making its way. And so was there and worked with my other provincial colleagues in bringing about the new Canadian Blood Agency. It was a really, really exciting period of time, working with men and women from all across Canada and having an impact nationally. So that was one of the areas. The other was we inherited the thalidomide issue while I was in health as well. And Alan Rock was the Minister for Health at that time. And of course, we had to bring this to resolution because there was compensation that needed to get paid to a whole lot of people, and we had to fix a date. People falling beneath that date would all be compensated, and the ones that above it didn't get anything. I remember being in one of the major hotels in Toronto when we announced that date, and it was, I think, from 1986 backwards. Before we went into the meeting, Alan said, we're going to set up in this large center. There's going to be tons of media there, national media. And there'll be all kinds of people who are not going to qualify. They'll be in this room too. And when we're finished, we're going to get up. We're going to take only a couple of questions. We're going to get up and we're going to turn and go through the kitchen and out to a car that will be there waiting for us. And that's what we did. Because it was one of the most controversial events that I've ever been at. People were very, very displeased with the decision that we made, and I was there speaking on behalf of the provinces. Alan was there as part of the federal government, and away we went. And I got correspondence for probably 6 months from people who didn't qualify, saying all sorts of things that were going to happen to us. But, hopefully they didn't. But, that was a very, very difficult process. Yeah. And the other one was the closure of the Plains Hospital in Regina. I hadn't been on the job for more than a month. And I'm now asked to go into the hospital and make the announcement that we were going to do this. That was a very, very difficult process, I got to say. And I didn't necessarily feel good about it, given that I had some personal things done there to help improve my own health. And then to be there to do this was an incredible event.
Clay resigned as member of the legislature for Yorkton in 2007, brought on by having to, again, deal with cancer. But was he ready at the time? Was he ready to leave politics in any case?
My dream was to spend some time in politics, do some things that I thought, might be beneficial to the future of the province. And then I was going farming with my brother, because we farmed before and he farmed when I was ill. And I probably did an extra year, or a term, I mean. We were buying land and working together and really do enjoy each other a lot. So I would have probably been finished in 2004, with Lorne just being new. He'd asked if I would stay, and I stayed. And then my health wasn't doing that well on a few fronts. So I was ready to go. And I didn't expect that, I lived this long. I wasn't supposed to. But I've had now, since 2009, I've been clear. And I've had really good care. And most of it was in Saskatchewan. People thought that I went all over the world to get treated. But I had my surgeries in Saskatchewan, except for the liver, which wasn't cancerous anyway. But that's where they thought I should go. My oncologist from Saskatchewan thought that's where I should go. But all my other surgeries were done in the province. We have some of the best oncology care anywhere in Canada, right in our backyard. Saskatoon, Regina, very, very good. But I'm not farming now. Farming ended when in 2009, when they said that things were not good for me. And then I had the good fortune of, meeting some really good friends, an individual who was involved in doing consulting work. We did some really good stuff, I thought.
So you left with no regrets?
None at all. I was ready to go. And I've always believed that politics should never be a career. It should be an interruption in your life. You go and do some things that are important to you. The public will decide how long they want to keep you, and usually you should leave before they ask you to depart.
Which you did.
Yeah, I did.
Clay was ready to leave. Others have been there for a long time and perhaps stay past their best before dates.
I think people stay for a variety of different reasons, and it depends on how they got there and why they got there. I mean, some people were earning more money as a MLA, and probably still are, than they would have ever earned in their careers, right? So there's that. So you have a financial perspective, a financial comfort in that. Secondly, there's an egotistical attitude that I think people take on after a period of time, like we're the government. So, even though you're not directly involved in influencing a whole lot, the reality is that you are part of a bigger scheme that makes decisions, even though many times it's really quite frustrating because you're taking a message that you don't really want to take, but you're doing it because you're part of this bigger egotistical environment that you live and work in. So I think there's that kind of that being another reason why I think people stay. The other is that I think after you're there for a period of time and you sort of accept your role. So this is going to be my role. And so this is what I'm going to continue to do. I'll be supportive to the Premier and do the best job I can do and try to do something for my constituency, And if you're in government, you can do more for your constituency than when you're not. I think those are some of the reasons why I think people stay.
If you had not gotten into cabinet, would you have stayed that long as you did?
Probably not. No, probably not. Well, when I first got, I sat on the very back corner of the legislature. On our side, though, I stayed on our side. We had so many members that some had to go and sit with the opposition. But I would say to people, they say, well, how are you doing these days in Regina? I said, I'm doing just fine because I'm here as much as I'm there. Because when I lean back in my chair in the legislature, I can touch my writing. So because that's how far away I am.
How far back you are from the center of power.
Yes, exactly. And I'm at home. So I just need to lean back, and I'm there. The closer you can get to the front bench, the more influence you have. That's just the reality.
It's now been 16 years, but Clay and his colleagues of the day still keep in touch, still get together occasionally.
I keep in touch with way more people than others do, but, I kind of like to know what people are doing. And we had people through here this summer, that were from, our government of the past, and there will be more that will come. The reality is that we're all getting older. We have something called the Owls meeting every year. Owls, yeah, because
as in wise owl?
That's it. That's exactly what it means. And because you've been there, you've done that, and we meet with the existing leader in the caucus. They allow us to voice our opinion, and we do. Okay.
Really, you do?
Yeah, we really do. We just had one just recently in July. We try to have it twice a year. We're now moving to about once a year. And it's getting more and more difficult for some people to attend. During my era, there are now 12 members that aren't around anymore. They passed on. We used to meet for a whole day, and then we would try to see if we could find a place that You could indulge in root beer or something like that. But now we have it from, we have lunch together, and then we take about 4 hours to have a chat, and then we leave. Roy was at the one that we had in July, and Lorne, of course, was there. I talk to Lorne probably monthly. We have a chat monthly about a variety of different things. Phone will ring and it could be him, or his phone will ring and it could be me.
Before we ended our conversation, we talked about politics today and how it is different from his years in Regina, in government, and in politics. Because things just are not quite the same as they were back then.
There was a different environment that we worked in, different understanding and appreciation for each other. Politics was never personal for us. The majority of us, there might be one or two or three people on either side of the house where they couldn't really enjoy or understand or stomach the person across the way from them. And it wasn't so much about the politics, it was more about the personality of the individual at that point with those few people. The shift has been so significant right now where people are attacking each other, rather than attacking the policies and the decisions that are made by a sitting government. And you see that at all levels now, federally and provincially, more so federally even right now than provincially. But it would not be unusual for us to have a heated debate in the House, a heated question period in the House. 20 minutes later, we'd be behind the aisle of each other's sides of the House having a conversation and a laugh about how theatrically weird we were, okay, or successful or unsuccessful we were. And then it would not be unusual for us to go out once a week for a meal. We'd sit across from each other. We'd talk about a variety of different things. I don't think that happens anymore. I just think that's disappeared. And you see a lot of it just in our communities. It's a different Saskatchewan province than what I was used to being a part of, where I think people could appreciate one another a little bit better. We had more empathy and understanding of cultural differences, even identity difference in terms of what we do when we do our work. That doesn't exist anymore. And it's not just Saskatchewan, it's here too. Now that we live here in British Columbia, we see it here. Although we see a bigger melting pot here than we do in Saskatchewan, because there are just more different cultures that are here than there are in Saskatchewan. And they're far more visible. And we've forgotten where we've come from to a large degree because we're all products of immigration. Today, it's not okay almost to come to Canada from a different part of the world and be accepted. It wasn't okay to a large degree when my grandparents came either, but we learned how to live in harmony, and to support each other and to, build communities and do things constructively. We're not doing that as well anymore. We're just not doing it. And I don't appreciate the personal attacks that we have on people today. Like it's just wrong. I mean, everybody's opinion matters.
I knew a number of people back at the time when Clay was in politics who were not members of his party, who might have been adamantly opposed to the NDP, but who would tell you that they had a respect for Clay, that personally they liked him, that they respected the fact that he did work in Yorkton and for Yorkton. It wasn't about the party, it was about the man who they liked. I talked to Murray Mandrick, who has been a reporter and columnist at the legislature for the leader post in Regina for close to 40 years, and who was there when Clay and his colleagues were in government. And I asked him what his memories, what his impressions were, his lasting impressions 16 years later.
I think he's what the NDP don't have right now, and certainly don't have in the smaller cities and rural communities, which is a likable, relatable guy that people would vote for and think of voting for without first noticing their party allegiance. It's hard enough these days because the first thing I think people look for these days is the party allegiance. But the second thing they obviously look for is who is the guy? How does he relate? If I remember correctly, Clay had a pretty extensive community involvement on council and otherwise. He was a good sense of humor, a guy that you could kind of relate to. I don't know if he was absolutely the best minister they ever had or had at the time, but I do know and I do recall him being the guy that people would kind of like. And I think that's why he thrived in politics and basically rose to substantial level in the provincial government. Particularly early on, that government had a lot of talent. Yeah. And it dwindled over time as governments do. But I think somebody early on spotted him as someone that they could help build a government around. And I dare say that had they followed that formula and maybe not abandoned it when they did, the NDP might be having more success over the last couple of decades than they had because they lost far too many people that could relate to communities and local communities. Clay Serby was in many ways a Saskatchewan guy, a rural Saskatchewan guy, a small city, small town guy. And I don't see that in the NDP anymore. It might seem a simple thing, but it's a big thing.
A final note. Clay's health is good. He has had no recurring issues with the cancer that took him out of politics and took up a number of years of his life when he was in Yorkton. He has satisfied to a large degree his lifelong dream, which few people knew about, of being a truck driver. When they were living at Good Spirit Lake, they had bought a large RV with air brakes, which made him get his Class 5 license so he could drive it, which was kind of his way of fulfilling that dream of driving truck. Since then, and occasionally still now, he drives for a company that brings RVs, trailers in from the United States to dealers in Canada. So he might go on the road for 2 or 3 days and do some long-distance hauling. Another way to satisfy that truck driver dream that's been with him since he was a kid. Thank you for listening. We will publish another podcast in 2 weeks. Visit yorktonstories.ca to hear this and all previous podcasts, and there you can also sign up to our email list so we can let you know when a new episode is available. Thanks again to our sponsors, Harvest Meats and Grain Millers Canada here in Yorkton, and thank you for listening. Your comments and suggestions are always welcome. Get in touch through our website or by emailing Dick, D-I-C-K, at yorktonstories.ca. We will talk again soon.